Good evening, dear viewers. Welcome to this special edition of Open Mic. As you can see, I'm at the Asmara Palace Hotel, and my guest for this evening is Miss Sandra Macharia. She's the director of the UN Information Service, Nairobi. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, so we're here at the Asmara Palace, and I know you're leaving now, okay? So thank you for sharing our floor today. By the way, my colleague here with me is Sabrina. She is from the Eritrea Profile, and this interview will also be published in the Eritrea Profile newspaper. Let me start off with my first line of question. Ms. Sandra, what are the main priorities of your visit to Eritrea, and how do they fit into the broader regional communication objectives of the UN Information Service?
All right. Thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Sabrina, for having me and for this interview. So as the director of the UN Information Service, we're part of the United Nations Department of Global Communications, and we're very much focused on solutions-oriented storytelling, which is really focused on how are we telling stories that demonstrate the impact, positive impact on people's lives. And as we are halfway through, about 5 years to the end of the Sustainable Development Goals, the target is 2030, it's really an opportunity to look at how the progress that the UN country team here is doing in terms of supporting Eritrean people, seeing how we can communicate better, surface a few more stories about solutions, about the impact on people's lives, and being able to then use our platforms to disseminate that story wider. At the same time, I'm here to work with a country team in Eritrea, the United Nations country team, around seeing how we can really promote a balanced narrative that is fact-based and that is really about showing the impact of the United Nations.
Okay, so Sandra, how did your meeting go with the officials, and were there any noteworthy agreements or areas identified for future collaborations in the communication field?
And so, thank you, Sabrina. We had the opportunity to meet with several Eritrean officials, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Planning. We met with the Commissioner of Sports and Culture, and met also with several others, the Minister for Information, for instance. And with that, also had an opportunity to meet with officials at the Asmara Museum, the museum down in Massawa, and meet some of the archaeologists and paleontologists that work there. And that was, I have to say, the work they're doing is amazing. We got to visit some of the sites that they're working on and see really firsthand evidence of what it is that they're working on and the rich cultural heritage that Eritrea has and that has been a custodian of for the Eritrean people. And of course, culture goes beyond borders. And so really being able to see that. And so this is, and I was here actually with one of our regional directors from UNESCO, who are also looking at some of this cultural heritage work. And so together, and of course with the country team, thinking through how can this story about the rich cultural heritage here be told, showing how the amazing historical heritage, the work that the archaeologists are doing, being able to see that firsthand, and seeing how we can actually work together in support of Eritrean priorities around these issues of culture, of storytelling, which is a very compelling story. And so as part of the next steps on that, we'd have to then have a reflection within the UN country team on what the next steps would be, of course in support of the Eritrean priorities around that area of work.
Okay. In what ways is the UN Information Service looking to support Eritrea's communication landscape and perhaps even enhance the flow of accurate and reliable information? Are there any specific plans or projects in the pipeline?
So like I said, my role here was on the invitation of the UN country team because they're the ones who are working in service and are here on the ground, working in Eritrea, supporting the government, supporting communities. And the idea then is how do we tell a more balanced story. What are the channels we can use? What are the stories that we can surface? And really, at the end of the day, it's what is the impact on people's lives? How are people's lives improving because of the investments that the government and with the support of the United Nations have made? And so as we think about our global network in the United Nations, when we're looking at stories on, say, whether it's health or whether food security, and showing what are the good practices that can be shared, because some of these could actually serve as inspiration in other countries for other actors. And when we also consider again that we're really getting close to the SDGs, and we'd had a step back, a regression on the Sustainable Development Goals because of the COVID pandemic. And so there's really pressure on all of us, really, whether you are a community worker, whether you are a private sector actor, whether you're a young person, whether you're in government, just at whatever level you are. Is there a way you can help us really accelerate on progress on those Sustainable Development Goals? Because they're truly about leaving nobody behind, so that we're talking about people living a life of dignity in a sustainable fashion as well. Yeah.
Okay, so how does your office intend to contribute to shaping and promoting a balanced image of Eritrea on both regional and global platforms?
So, like I mentioned, we talk very much about solutions-oriented stories, and that requires us to be fact-based, to use data where we can, and to really demonstrate that this is a story that we can stand behind. We have fact-checked it, and we know that it is what it actually is. But it doesn't also mean that it's always a good story or good news. What we're trying to demonstrate is that these are complex problems when you talk about, say, health or food security or these areas of work, but can we demonstrate that there's some progress? Are there some innovations, some activities that can really help us move the needle on some of these things? And so for us, a balanced narrative would include evidence-based content, and it would then think about how do you reach, from a communications perspective, how do you reach the audiences that you're trying to reach in the best way that is effective, so that we look at a plethora of platforms, see what the options are, because what we don't want to happen is for people to say that they don't know what it is that they could have done to contribute to all of us making some progress on these very important goals that are very much about the dignity of human beings.
So, Sandra, we all agree that communication is vital for national development. And what practical steps or resources can your team offer to help Eritrea improve its information sharing infrastructure and outreach strategies?
Thanks, Rafa. That's a really important question. It is true, and I do believe that communications is a fundamental piece of national development. And that's because development is about people. And people need to know how they can access services, how they can give feedback on certain issues. They need to know what's on offer. And it's also helpful when people know that there's progress that has been made, because it gives them hope that things are getting better, things could get better, and that there's something that they themselves can do actively as agents of change. And so communications is really at the core of everything, because if you are doing something and nobody knows anything about it or can't hear about it, then it really is may not be as effective as it could be if you actually prioritized communications at the center or at even the beginning of a process, a programming process, for instance. And so for us at the Department of Global Communications, of which my office is a part, it really is about thinking through where are some of these stories that can be surfaced. And when you think about stories that haven't been told, you know, the sort of not forgotten stories, but it's when you think about an angle that no one has covered before, is there something of interest there that we can showcase? And when I think about, for example, my travel down to Massawa and Adulis, and seeing in Massawa the mosque, the oldest mosque, I think they say in Africa, that is just an astounding piece of history, and is so meaningful, not just for Eritrea, but for millions and billions of people around the world. And so these kinds of stories are amazing, they're fascinating, and they haven't been told very often. And so how do we get communications to be at the center of something like that, which is beneficial in terms of not just telling people about it, but then even potentially sparking more awareness and also activity around the preservation of these very valuable cultural artifacts and heritage.
So Sandra, during your visit, you engaged with various local partners. Could you share any impactful experience or insight that may influence future cooperations in the field of communication?
For sure. I think I have to say that I think the visits to the museums have been quite impactful. We saw a lot of the history from sort of prehistoric right through the reflection of the cultural artifacts from different nationalities in Eritrea. And so being able to see that and experience that, and I've only been here a few days, and so that was an amazing, it was a quick history of Eritrea that was valuable. But even right through to today, you know, so seeing a modern Eritrea and seeing that journey in a very suppressed time, but also just being able to visit the archaeological sites, but also to have conversations with the archaeologists, with the paleontologists, with the people working very hard to put this kind of work together and to preserve this culture, which is really a world culture. It's a gift to the world. And so that has been very moving, because it's not just about now, it's about Eritrea before, you know, and sort of millions of years ago. And that has been inspiring, it's been moving, and what it actually does is give me hope that if we can preserve this and remember where we've come from, but also the importance of protecting this and preserving it for future generations, for them to be able to see the story of Eritrea and the story of the continent over time. I think that was just amazing. It was amazing.
Okay, Sandra, thank you so much for your time. But before we close, I had a question about your visit to Adulis, but you've already said it. So,
I cannot emphasize enough what an amazing site Adulis is.
So if you could just tell me a little bit about that more, and perhaps any final words that you would want to tell me as well.
So the visit to Adulis was, firstly, it was beautiful, I have to say, and it was amazing to also get a sense of what was in the area, I mean, at that time. And when you think about how long the coastline is here, and you think that there was trading happening, that there were people coming from all over the world to trade, to meet other people, to exchange. And we saw some of the old coins, we saw some of the old pottery. And so the idea that this is a site that is being protected, that is being managed also in a way that the local community, we understand, is involved in the archaeological activities that are happening there. That was amazing. The fact that we can see today where our foremothers were working and trading and visiting and just having a cup of coffee, you know, is just an astounding idea from a communications perspective. It's a very attractive idea to me. Because it shows that we come from somewhere, that we didn't just happen here, and that we actually have a purpose on this earth. And so the visit to both Massawa and to Adulis, I definitely will not forget that anytime soon. Yeah. And then in terms, because you asked in terms of final thoughts, just to reiterate that for us working at the United Nations, it's really about how we can make a tangible difference in people's lives. It really is about the urgency of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are about people, and really centering people, and also telling the stories of people who are marginalized, people who are usually left behind. So finding those stories, showcasing their own agency in their own development, in their own, and seeing the realization of their own aspirations as people. Because I always say, I think, that ultimately we're all the same, and we just want a better life for our children and our children's children. So whatever it is that we can do today in advancing these Sustainable Development Goals, it's not just a term, it's not just words, it's not this high concept idea. It really is about impacting people's lives positively. Just to add that being in Asmara, a place that I hadn't visited before, I have found it to be very welcoming. I have found it's been a bit hot on the way down to Massawa, but really just the idea that there are rich stories here. There's a rich story of heritage, there's a rich story of resilience, and so how it is that we can all work together to advance a more balanced evidence-based narrative, I think is something that the country team here has been speaking about, not just amongst themselves, but also with other partners and in support of the Eritrean government.
Sandra, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being our guest for our program this evening, Open Mic, and I hope you have a safe trip back home. Dear viewers, that wraps up this week's Open Mic session with my guest Sandra Macharia, the Director of UN Information Service Nairobi. Again, we thank her on behalf of everyone watching. Good night from us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Yeah.